Great to see you. It's been too long, way too long. I want to know what you've been doing. I know Spring and doing projects, collecting all the voices uh, has been a core part of your work, and I just kind of want to know how you get started with that, and of course I also want to know, how is it that you're using liberating structures to support that work. So how do
Mhm.
you get started? What's the first kind of thing you do?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. But let me just say at the beginning is that the premise of liberating structures, the premise of Spring is that every voice matters. When you're trying to understand any kind of human organization, community, system, whatever it might be, the each one is unique, and each one is made up of all the unique human beings, and each human being has a unique perspective, a unique voice. And so Spring is about how do we not lose those voices when we're trying to figure out what's going on, when we're faced with decisions. And so typically what happens is that a leader or a group, something, an organization, whatever it might be, they're faced with some issues, some challenges. One client was a Department of Education who was needing help with special education, and they had hundreds and hundreds of students and teachers and parents, and trying to figure out what's the experience and what's going on. How can we do better with special and inclusive education? Well, that's a really complex challenge, and there's no simple answer to that. And so the question is, how do we find that out? And so Spring is a way of capturing those kinds of voices at scale to figure out what's going on, to make it possible to make wise decisions, to see what's going on, to understand what's going on, and make wise decisions. So the first thing is you have some sort of problem that you need to address or deal with, and typically you're looking to make decisions, or you're looking to understand some important issue for whatever reasons. And so the first thing is to identify what is that, and what is it you want to find out, and who is the population, who are the stakeholders that whose insight is going to be really valuable and critical to understand that.
So like Spring, liberating structures exists to include and unleash all voices in shaping what happens next. So there's a lovely fit to start with. That's the reason that they exist. So I can imagine that you want to include all the voices for education, and there's many, and uh, and they need to define, in part, to even start on some effort where their voices are explored. They probably need to define the problem together. At least some of them probably need to be involved in conceiving a project, the one that you would work on.
Yeah.
So, the typical thing would be a survey, right? Some survey where all the responses are collected, and then it's somebody else analyzes it over here, and they come back and say, "Ta-da! An expert has told us here's the problem."
Yep. Yep.
What? How do you? Of course, there's a liberating structure for that it does include all the voices, and one that's really great is called impromptu networking. It's super easy to do. You can include all those people, but how do you, with a client, how do you break them away from some way in which all those voices are simply flattened by a survey and then some expert opinion? How do you stop that from happening?
Well, you're hitting on the whole uh, essence of how Spring as a methodology works, and it's built on the understanding that the way human beings make sense of our worlds is through narrative, through stories. We go to work, and we have some experiences with our boss, with our coworkers, with customers. And when we go to the coffee shop, and we're talking with our neighbor or friend, and they say, "So how's it going?" Well, we tell them stories about what happened at work, and whatever opinions we have, they grow out of the context of those stories. The problem with the traditional survey is they ask us for our opinion. And every opinion that I share is abstracted from some stories, and often a range of stories. And I'm asked what I think about something. And of course, it begs the question, what I think about today, or what I think about over the last week or the last year. There's a whole range of things that end up being abstracted, and my voice disappears. And in the end, you end up with a survey, so you end up with statistical averages and means and different things. And you can say X percent, answered the question this way and X percent answered it that way. And then, as you say, an expert says, well, this is what that means. But really, the only person who really knows what the opinion means is the person whose story it was. And so the genius, if you will, of the Spring methodology is that it invites people to share specific stories. Tell us a story, share an experience about special education, one that really encouraged you or one that really disturbed you. We often ask for the two ends, and they share a story. And then we ask them to answer some questions, a short range of questions about what that story meant to them. So they interpret that story. And there's a couple things that are going on there. In the instrument, the story that they shared and the interpretation are never separated. So that when you could have hundreds of thousands, but you can look at, here is the patterns of how people interpreted stories, and here are the stories behind this pattern of data. And then you have a chance to say, oh, there's context there. There's stuff going on. Is there anything going on in those stories that generates that pattern? And so you have this lovely blend of qualitative data, which is the stories, and people can share more than one. They can, share a story about a good story and a bad story, however many stories they like to share. It's not like a survey where you answer it once and that's it. Share as many stories as you like and interpret each one. And then we end up with patterns. And of course, that's how we make sense of the world, as we see patterns. That's what we're doing in Liberating Structures, is patterns emerge. And then we say, ooh, that's interesting. What do we make of that pattern? And of course, in the end, when that emerges, when the results and the fruit of that comes, you can, as the people who are trying to make decisions say, ooh, are there patterns that we want to amplify? We can see these are patterns that are really encouraging what was going on in the stories. Is there anything in those stories that would help us figure out things we could do that would give more of those kinds of patterns, or vice versa? Here's some things, whoa, we don't want to see that happening. What's going on in those stories? Is there anything going on there? Do we see any patterns that we could dampen and that might reduce the number of those kinds of stories? And you can see there's incredibly rich insights that emerge, and it emerges because the voices matter. The other thing is probably worth saying is that the questions and the instruments are always designed in a way to be ambiguous. There's no right or wrong answer. So you can't game it. You can't punish or reward. You're just sharing a story. And because it's not able to be gamed, it's also, we say, null hypothesis. So there's no presupposition about what the right answers will be. It's designed in a way simply to let the stories emerge, let the voice emerge, which is exactly what we try to do in impromptu networking or whatever. It's to say, let's see what emerges. Let's put out the invitation and see what emerges, and then make sense of that.
What's so interesting is that invitation. It's an honest, direct invitation to a person to tell a story. And simultaneously, it's not their opinion. I'm least interested in your opinion. I don't think it helps much in lots of situations. I am very interested in your story, and that's rich. It expands the set of possibilities, whereas your opinion almost immediately flattens. And that's when we do the opposite of collecting stories. We get that expert to flatten all those stories into something that is not very useful. So,
one more thing. I got to tell you, it reminded me of something when you said that, Keith. And that is what the other thing that happens in surveys. In surveys, the standard operating practice is to cut out the outliers. You have one out here and one, you cut them out. Whereas in this, if we see a bunch of interpretations that are up in this corner of a graph, and we see 3 down here, we're curious, what's going on with those 3? and we have the stories of those three. We can look at those three. Far from being cast out, there might be an insight there that's really, really important. And so it allows the potential for discovering the outliers who have seen something that may be critical to making sense of the whole system.
Well, and it's another thing I think shared between us and these methodologies we're talking about, these approaches, is this deep respect for people and their local story, their local solution, their local problem, whatever that may be. That's going to be the source of moving forward. The invitation to tell the story is a sign of respect, and then in that telling of the story is also enough respect that you believe that solutions can be generated out of that trusting relationship. So what I love about what you're saying is you've included people in a way that they will own and operate their own future. The
Yep.
story that they tell themselves about what they're doing as it's unfolding in front of them.
Right.
So you've kind of said that you invite people to talk about the problems and the possibilities. I'm curious, when you've looked at this, how do you turn the corner? Well, first you've got to design the instrument, but I'm particularly interested in how you impart the invitation to shape the future out of the stories of what's happening in front, or with a shared knowledge of all the stories that have been unfolding, including those outlying ends. How do you invite them to start? Because that's just descriptive. Sounds kind of descriptive. So what do you do to unleash this? We own our own future, or we can tug parts of the present to make a future that's more of our liking. What do you do?
Well, that's it. Yeah. And of course, that therein lies the rub, as they say. Actually, liberating structures is really critically helpful. Let's say we've done a study and we've had thousands of responses, so we've ended up with thousands of experiences that have been shared and interpreted. And so we have a wealth of quantitative data, which is the patterns of, the quantitative ways of the statistical of all the way they've interpreted the stories. But we also have the stories, and we can say, here's a group of data here from, of interpretive data, and here's the stories that go with those. And what we do is we need to play with that. And we play with that by pulling together representative stakeholders, and depending on the situation, the client, what's possible, virtual or face-to-face is or both, is finding a group of stakeholders that speak to as much as possible. And again, we face the human limitations of space and time. As much as possible, they represent the diversity of the group that's been contributed their stories, and we bring them together and we invite them to play with the data. So we share with them some of the patterns that we see, whatever liberating structures might be appropriate at that point. We invite them to say, so what do you notice here? What, so what, and now what? And tease those out. See what, and sometimes we do it by saying, here's the quantitative data. What does that suggest to you? So they look at the quantitative data and they say, well, it suggested this and this and this. And we say, and they capture all of that. And then we say, well, here's the stories that goes with that. What do the stories tell you now? And how does your view change? And it's really interesting because people often are saying, whoa, wow, that's different. I remember somebody telling me, this person interpreted their story wrong. And I'm saying, well, that's really difficult to imagine. And so then it becomes a matter of curiosity. And so you're really provoking a deep curiosity. You're showing these are patterns. These are patterns of stories. Okay, these stories are kind of alike in these ways. These are patterns of how stories are interpreted. And what are you curious about? What does that suggest to you? What might we look? Because we can say, well, these stories were interpreted around these lenses in this way. What do these stories look like through this other lens? Because we have this question we ask people about interpretation. We have another question we ask, and we say, well, how does this question compare to that question in these stories? And as they play with that, as they experiment, as they identify themes, and any kind of liberating structure, TRIZ, obviously 1, 2, 4, all, almost everything has 1, 2, 4, all in it. And I love giving people sentences to finish, sort of the kinds of sentences that you have in the Mad T. But as you look at these, you've looked at all this stuff. Here are some sentences. What emerges? So people complete those, and then they share them with each other, and they have these conversations. And then we're asking if there was if there was an insight, 1 or 2 insights that are emerging out of all of that. What might they be? And stuff starts to emerge. Themes start to emerge. And of course, you can ask, so what? Now what? If you had a hypothesis about what would make a difference from everything that you've seen, if there are things that could lead to, positive, amplifying some positive things, dampening some negative things or desirable things, undesirable things, what would you suggest? And so then insights start to emerge. But the thing is, in their experience, the people, the group and these stakeholders, they have and actually I'm thinking of one particular client, because the people who are in the group were not people who naturally talk to each other. They were kind of in adversarial relationships normally. But in the process, in the experience of being together and working with the data, they found themselves finding common ground. They found themselves wrestling with issues, and they had actual voices in front of them of what people were experiencing. And which is a very different thing from just having an opinion in front of you. And so then they had conversations, and it was really amazing to see relationships build in that, of how they could figure out things together.
Well, I think we share the hypothesis, let's say it's a theory for a minute, that innovation or change arises in the adjacencies, with the person next to you who's different, or they're in a different discipline or domain, or they're just very different than you. It's the in between those stories, those disciplines, where new things arise. So I agree with you. Once you've got people together and talking, there's some natural amount of surprising new things that start to take shape. That there are a couple really good liberating structures that help you emphasize possibilities and a bit of believing before seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And those are ones, critical uncertainties. There's a new one called future present. Even something like 2510. Yeah. 2510 crowdsourcing is, if you were 10 times bolder, what well,
that's actually a question that's one of my open-ended questions, actually, very often. If you were 10 times bolder, in light of everything.
Well, if that's part of a spring, if that's part of your analysis, then you have the seeds for sorting and sifting the boldest actionable ideas of a group, and then emphasizing the possibilities isn't something that the leader does. It arises out of the community of people you've invited to shape the future. And that is just so exciting. I guess the other thing, you've just included, unleashed all these people. If the client doesn't have a support mechanism for people to take action on their own, or to go off and use the information, do you do anything to support individuals, or help the organization shape peer-to-peer support for the kinds of fabulous ideas that arise?
That's a really good question. And on one level, I say, don't I wish. It really depends on the client and the context. Certainly in terms of myself and others with whom I've worked in this world of doing spring projects, a significant part of our engagement is um, educational. People are experiencing stuff that's new to them, and we want them to not only have a good experience, but to understand why that's a good experience. And we are quite explicit to say, what we're doing here today is something you could do in any context, and just encourage you to watch what's going on. And sometimes even ask that question: did you notice what we did? So there's a sense of that's part of helping people to appreciate and understand why they had a good experience in the conversations and in the work that we just did, and to notice it. In terms of ongoing support, it really depends, because one of my clients was, I'm in Yukon, and the client was, on the East Coast of the United States, and my world doesn't intersect with their world. On the other hand, if I have local clients, my world does intersect. And obviously, I do what I do because I want to see people have more success and be able to be effective and productive and doing good things. And any ways that I can encourage that, I'm here to do that. And by introducing them to resources, so I point out Liberating Structures. Have you checked out Liberating Structures? There's some really neat resources. They're really simple to use. You can try them out. And of course, people get tired of me sending them links to read and do stuff like that. But all that stuff.
It's very important to keep the support, to find a way for people to support each other as they do this work into the future.
Right.
So we're focused on shaping a new narrative, a new kind of organization. There's some transition underway, or multiple transitions. If you've lived through the last 2 years, you're probably in the middle of a couple or more. And so I like to use things like Troika Consulting, where the support is built into the relationships that have just been formed in the project. So we're doing the work, we're analyzing together, we're looking at the data, and we're making sense of it in a particular way. And so, like did you notice what we just did? Helping them, but also where else might you turn that same approach to supporting each other? Could you bring that into your everyday meeting? Why is it just in this project?
I do want to say one thing, though. You reminded me of something else, because this is one of the things that Spring can be really, really useful, is not only for doing a project to figure something out, but as you learn, as you see things that you get ideas about, there's some levers that we can pull and buttons we can press. We think we could get some traction if we did this or this. We think this would change some patterns. You can continue using a Spring instrument or a Spring initiative to watch and see, are the patterns shifting? So it's possible to, in real time, if the instrument is designed and the initiative is designed in such a way, people can continue to be submitting stories, and you're taking some actions, and you're seeing, and if it's a great big huge jurisdiction, you might take some experiments. You do an action in this part of the jurisdiction, another action in that part of the jurisdiction, and you watch the stories coming in. You say, are the stories shifting? Are the stories shifting? And that's possible to watch in real time, just in terms of gathering data and continuing the conversation, which is an incredibly powerful option.
Yeah, at least my practice, I've gotten to a place where anything that doesn't have some built-in durability to it, that it will be repeated. I just can't do very many things that have a short shelf life. And so, and I'm willing to do almost anything to provoke that ongoing shift in behavior. So with Troika, one thing that happens is you get help from two people. And if you have the mix of people you're talking about, they're going to be really different than you. And almost every time, people will say, I had the two best consultants ever. They were the smartest, the wisest, the kindest, the sweetest, whatever the list of attributes. And I'm going, well, what if everyone in your organization was that wise, that sweet, that wonderful, but you haven't talked to them before. Why wouldn't you just tap that approach? Why wouldn't you use Trinka Consulting and mix it up every time?
Yep.
Why wouldn't you do that? If they really were the greatest, sweetest, smartest, whatever, and it's like it's always there for us to take advantage of it if we just did. If we
Right.
just did. And so that ongoing quality, the fact that you could continue to tell the story as it's unfolding, as you're shaping it and it's unfolding, is so great.